Hi guys, it's Lily,
And this is Clover.
and welcome back to
All the tea we cannot sip.
Hello, good evening.
Hi.
Well, we're back at it for another Memoir Madness. I
Yes.
literally just got done with this 10 minutes ago.
Oh, it's fresh on your mind.
Very
I didn't
fresh.
finish till this morning. Um, for our listeners, we're talking about The Spare by Prince Harry for our memoir madness this month. And I actually think this is my favorite memoir so far.
I think so too. I feel like he didn't write anything that was untrue. It wasn't just opinions about other people. He talked about his interactions with other people, and I thought that that was so great in showing that it isn't that is exactly what he experienced, and it's not subjective as in saying this person is terrible. It was this happened and this is how I reacted.
I feel the same way. Like he was very honest, both about things he could have done better or differently. And I was kind of shocked at all the tea he spilled, with royals and celebrities and stuff when they write this stuff. They don't always tell the truth. They hide stuff, but there was lots of tea in this book.
There was, and I feel like since he wrote it, that it wasn't written, from a royal standpoint of a ghostwriter that works for the royal family. It was his
Right.
words, his memories, and it made me feel a lot of feelings, very different from the feelings I felt when we read, or we're going to talk about I'm Glad My Mom Died by Janet McCurdy. That made me also feel a lot of things, but this made me feel so sad in a different way for him.
Yeah, I know. I agree. I felt sad, angry, humorous. I felt proud of him.
Me
Um,
too. Disgusted by some of the,
yes. And it
as
really revealed a lot about how the royal family truly operates and how bad paparazzi and media really is, especially pertaining to the royal family.
and I think we touched on this last week when we talked about Tom Felton, um, his memoir, but especially in the UK and Europe, I feel like the paparazzi is a lot more relentless. Like they're really, really annoying in America, but I feel like they're dangerous overseas.
I've seen them be dangerous here in the US, and I feel like the UK does have more laws um, for privacy and trespassing and things like that, but apparently it doesn't cover the royal family. Like, we'll get into it more as we
Yeah.
go, I'm sure, but one of the main takeaways from the spare was how Harry taught ignorant people like me who had no idea how this stuff worked, but how the palace and the royal family was expected to work with the media. They were
Yeah.
expected to give them stories. They were expected to take their newborn baby out right after giving birth and letting the media take pictures of them and how when Harry spoke out against that and asked for support from his family to not leak stories. His own family was leaking stories about him. He was shut down and just told, this is part of being a royal. Just ignore it. We all went through it. Yeah, and that was eye opening.
It was. And just so sad because he does talk about how it is royalty. Like, yes, the queen was his grandma, and now the king is his father, but they were always the king, the queen and the heir to the throne. And I feel like it's such a hazy line because I know the relationships I have in my life. I feel like if I had a title like that, I don't know if I could be like, well, I'm the queen. You know?
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah, I get what you're saying. And well, we have to remember his grandma, Queen Elizabeth, was not the heir. She was never supposed to be in line, but her uncle, who was the king, got, what do you call that? When they took his crown away, basically. Um, because he married a divorced American woman and he chose love over being king. So that's when Queen Elizabeth's father became king. And I believe she was in her early 20s at this time, right? I
yeah.
could be wrong about that. So imagine getting married, wanting to start your family, and then you become queen when you thought you were going to have a much more normal life. So she knew what it was like to have a more normal life before, but then her four children, including Prince Charles, now King Charles, they were born into royalty and they were born to be heirs. And you can see from the way Harry describes it, the difference between his grandmother and his father, and how his father was so obsessed with what people thought about him, what they were seeing in the tabloids, being this not robot, but living to make the whole country happy. That's no way to live.
No, and you're not going to make everyone happy no matter what you do.
Mm-hmm. And look what it gave him. He met Camilla when he I'm kind of going off on a tangent now, but Charles met Camilla when he was young and loved her and wanted to marry her, but he let the pressures of being a royal make him make different decisions. So he married Diana and had children with her because he was fulfilling his succession. Harry even says, because his book is kind of split into three parts. So, like, the first part is entitled Out of the Night That Covers Me, and is kind of about how he grew up and his mom dying. And then the second one is Bloody but Unbowed, which is really focused on his military service. And then the third section is Captain of My Soul, which deals with Meghan coming into his life. And they are all very different moods and very different things going on in his life. But the first one about how he grew up was the most illuminating to me because there was just so much stuff I was ignorant to.
Me too. And I guess that's the whole thing is that we are Americans, and although the royal family, we know who they are, it's not ingrained into our daily lives, I think, as much as if we
Yeah.
were from the UK. So we only know what the really big things that were happening.
Yes.
And so I didn't know a lot either.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I admit, like, I remember seeing Diana and Harry and William on the covers of American magazines a lot when we were growing up. And I had the same thought, well, they're royalty. Their life must be awesome. But this
Yeah,
book really showed, like, you assume that they're rich, they can do whatever they want whenever they want. But Prince Harry describes how little choice he really had. He didn't have his own money. He said he never owned a car, wasn't able to buy his own clothes without permission. Um, he had to ask permission to even propose. He didn't, yeah, just didn't have a lot of rights and a lot of choices, and that's really sad.
it is. And it's not even that he had to ask for the money to do things, it was he had to ask, and then basically he said his father, besides the asking to propose, he had to ask the queen that, but his father had to deem it worthy of the
Mm-hmm.
money. And that
Yes.
his father even brought up not really wanting to support Meghan in their life, and how he was like, well, money's running out. And I was,
There's not enough to go around.
well, one, Meghan was successful before she met Harry. And two,
Mm-hmm.
I just, I think that King Charles is very self serving, that he will
Mm-hmm.
throw anyone under the bus for himself.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's not completely true in all situations, but some of the situations that Harry had talked about made me just sad.
I agree. One of the first things he says in the opening chapter, well, so the prologue really hooked me because the first thing he talks about is attending Prince Philip's funeral, or was it King Philip?
Prince. It was the Queen's husband, but he was
Okay.
Prince.
So they were attending Prince Philip's funeral, and he said he arrived and Prince William and Prince Charles were just walking shoulder to shoulder, coming towards him like they were mad at him. And he said it was a really weird sight because normally those two would be bickering, but he could just tell that that point they were totally against him and that they were cold and they were upset at him for leaving the monarchy at this point and doing an interview with Oprah. And so you immediately begin to read the book and see, okay, this is really about him healing through these losses of his family and coming to terms with seeing people for who they really are. And when it's people you love, especially your family, that is a really hard lesson to learn.
It is, and it's so sad. And I feel like that is such a not even just like a royal thing, it happens in
Mm-hmm.
everybody's life that even if two people don't get along, if they don't like you, that's enough common ground for them to act like best friends.
Absolutely. Like, what's that saying? The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
that
really
is so
sad.
true. And it,
So he talked a little bit about growing up, and he said he was 20 when he first heard this story, but it really upset him, obviously, that the day he was born, his dad allegedly looked at Princess Diana and said, "Oh, wonderful. Now you've given me an heir and a spare. My work is done." And then went off to meet his girlfriend, who we can assume is Camilla. Can you
oh,
imagine just having your husband's baby? And Harry said that even his mom called him the spare. Like, that was just their nicknames for William and Harry, the heir and the spare. So he felt like he was just born to be a replacement. He even joked that they kept him around in case William ever needed a kidney or a blood transfusion.
that's so sad. It makes me think of
Mhm.
my what is that? My Sister's Keeper or something. Have you seen that movie or read the book?
I haven't, but I think someone recommended that to me recently. What's it about?
It's like about this girl, and she ends up suing her family because she is born basically because her sister is very sick, and they basically like have another child to give their sick child like bone marrow,
Yikes.
and they made a
That based
movie
on a
about
true
it.
story?
I don't know if it's based on a true story. I actually haven't read the book. I saw the movie, but I did hear that the movie ended different from the book. I think Cameron Diaz was in it, uh, which it just made me think that I wouldn't put it past them, and that how just mean Prince William was basically throughout their
Yes.
whole life. When they were in school together, they lived in the same like dormitory building, but he was like, you don't know me. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously everyone knows that they're brothers because they had bodyguards.
Well, yeah, and they were the princes of England.
Yeah,
And
so
they did go to private schools, boarding schools, by the way, which I know that's a more common thing in Europe, but that's even been brought up by Europeans about Harry Potter because some people said it glamorized boarding school, and the reality of people who have survived boarding school is that it actually feels really isolating and sad. And can you imagine only seeing your parents on the weekend? And that's with normal parents. Like Harry and William's parents were royals, so they were probably busy on a lot of weekends. So William was like his only family nearby. And he tells this story of how because he was naughty at, I think it was called Eton, the school they went to. He was naughty and got into trouble with his friends a lot because he felt stupid. He didn't feel like he was on par with a lot of the other students. So it's normal for students who feel like they're not good at school to become the class clowns and pranksters and things like that. And I think they got high on marijuana, if I recall correctly.
I do believe
And
that's true.
they dared him to shave his head. And he said as soon as he did it, he was mortified because he knew it was going to be in the papers and that everyone was going to make fun of him. So he ran to William's dorm room and just wanted consolation. He just wanted his big brother to tell him it was going to be okay. But instead, William just laughed at him.
And it doesn't help that even though internally he may have felt that he wasn't as book smart as his peers, but the tabloids also called him stupid all the time. Like,
Mm-hmm.
because he wasn't as smart, he didn't get, you know, excellent grades. They were, the book I thought was very well written. So he has to possess some smarts because even with editing, there are still bad books.
So now that you mention that, though, did he? I do, but because this is just my opinion, and this didn't pop into my head until I was reading the third section, which was about Meghan. Because I feel like when he was writing the military section, the the voice felt a lot more casual and the dialogue he chose and stuff just seemed more genuine. Like I could totally believe he had written it. But there's this part in the Meghan section where he was talking about this beach they were at, and he described the water as like glittering azure. Like, I find it hard to believe a man who totally said he hated books and reading and didn't even know what Eat, Pray, Love was when Meghan brought it up to him, read all of this himself because some of it is so eloquent. And he even says in that section how when they were writing like statements to put out in the press and stuff like that, him and Meghan would sit at the laptop and take turns. So when I was reading that section, it wouldn't have surprised me if Meghan had helped him with some parts because she has a long line of writing. She had a very popular travel and lifestyle blog that had hundreds of thousands of readers before she met him, and she had to shut it all down when they got engaged and whatnot by palace orders. But it would be so interesting to compare her writing.
That is a good point. Part of me had some thoughts like he did talk quite a few times about how he was not smart, he did not like to read, and he just wasn't book smart. I do believe
Hmm.
you can't be stupid and learn how to fly a helicopter.
No, he's definitely not stupid.
um, but you're right. There were some descriptors that were a little over the top in some parts, but also, like the Azure. Um, but maybe we in America just don't use Azure to describe things, and maybe they do in
That's
Britain.
true.
I don't know, but that's definitely. I read another part about like him in a garden with daffodils, and it just made me think that that
Yeah.
too. What you were saying. Um,
And if she did help him with that, I don't see anything wrong with that. They are a team and they work very closely on lots of projects. And I think it's sweet if you like help your husband edit the book he's been working so hard on and you don't even need that recognition. You don't even need that your name on it, you know?
yeah, that is real. That's a good point because also I don't know if I would let anybody read anything I wrote until I was completely done.
Yeah,
So maybe I think that's sweet too.
I do too. Yeah, it was very good book and it was so honest and open, and that takes guts. That would be hard for even an average person to do, but let alone someone who's been in the spotlight so much of his life. And knowing that it's going to get published and people are going to tear it apart. Like, we enjoyed it, but I have seen negative reviews and backlash from his family. That takes guts to say, this is my story and I'm going to tell it.
And that I really applaud him for saying that because I'm sure his family and, the royal, I forget what they call it, but how they have people that put out statements. I'm sure they put out statements, you know, tearing the book apart and just to be brave enough to put your story out because not all of it made him sound great in some parts.
Mm-hmm.
He did admit that it was a wrong choice to dress up as Hitler for a costume party
Mm-hmm.
or to do strip poker or whatever in Las Vegas. But also, we have been in our 20s before, and I know I have definitely made choices that I wouldn't want blasted across the public even years later. Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
you know, he's still ignorant, even though we may have all said ignorant things, we grow and he even said like he went and listened to a Holocaust survivor speak and how he, you know, kicked himself kind of for not educating himself more, even though like he learned
Yes,
about it in school that he wasn't more empathetic and he didn't learn more at that time to realize the gravity of, dressing as Hitler and, the sign of disrespect it was to the people it was disrespecting.
I agree. Because at first, when I started reading that part, it did kind of seem like he was minimizing it a little bit. Like, he said that William and Kate both thought it was hilarious and told him he should do it. But then he admitted, after like he talked to Jewish people and survivors of the Holocaust, and like he learned his lesson, how that isn't something to joke about, especially as a public figure. And I feel like at first he was maybe minimizing it a little bit, but he did end up fully owning it, and
Yeah,
it seemed really genuine.
because it was a little bit before he did talk about how he should have known. He brought up the incident, and then there was a bunch of years, and then he talked about it again.
Yes,
And I do think that, although I do think it came full circle, and it was, you know, it didn't seem like he was just brushing over things in some memoirs that we read, like, oh, that happened, but it's not my fault because other people
mm-hmm,
told me it was okay.
right. I totally agree. um so he talks about growing up and just the strangeness of it all, like how from a very young age they couldn't go anywhere without paparazzi harassing them, and how upsetting it was to see how it upset his mom, and how sometimes she would just pull over because they were being chased, and she would get out of her car and yell at them like, please, I'm with my kids, please leave us alone, and how they just wouldn't listen. And then to lose his mom because paparazzi was chasing her must have been devastating. And I did want to read where he says when he first found out. So he was with his dad and William in one of their Scottish properties, I believe. And his dad had been having a party that night, and he knew his mom was in Paris and that she was going to see her soon. So he said he was sleeping, and he says, Pa, he was standing at the edge of the bed looking down. His white dressing gown made him seem like a ghost in a play. Yes, darling boy. He gave a half smile, averted his gaze. He looked at me in a funny way, a way he'd never looked at me before. With fear? What is it, Pa? He sat down on the edge of the bed. He put a hand on my knee. Darling boy, Mummy's been in a crash. I remember thinking, crash, okay, but she's all right, yes? I vividly remember the thought flashing through my mind, and I remember waiting patiently for Pa to confirm that indeed Mummy was all right, and I remember him not doing that. There was then a shift internally. I began silently pleading with Pa or God or both. No, no, no. Pa looked down into the folds of the old quilts and blankets and sheets. There were complications. Mummy was quite badly injured and taken to hospital, dear boy. He always called me darling boy, but he was saying it quite a lot now. His voice was soft. He was in shock, it seemed. Oh, hospital? Yes, with a head injury. Did he mention paparazzi? Did he say she'd been chased? I don't think so. I can't swear to it, but probably not. The paps are such a problem for Mummy, for everyone. It didn't need to be said. I thought again. Injured, but she's okay. She's been taken to hospital. They'll fix her head and we'll go and see her. Today. Tonight at the latest. They tried, darling boy. I'm afraid she didn't make it. And he goes on to say how Pa didn't hug me. He wasn't great at showing emotions under normal circumstances. How could he be expected to show them in such a crisis? But yeah, so it made me really sad that his dad wouldn't even hug him. Because if there's ever a time you need a hug, it's when you lose a parent.
Yeah. And it really tugged at my heartstrings how for a long time he believed that his mom had disappeared, that she
Mm-hmm.
went off the grid and started a new life, that he just couldn't comprehend that she was dead. And I do think that he talks about not talking about it growing up with his brother or his father or anybody really. But I think if somebody, when something major like that happens, and I do believe that times have gotten more progressive, but kids definitely need therapy when something big like that happens.
Yes, I agree.
And
Yeah, he talks about how the way he dealt with it was convincing himself that his mom wasn't dead. She couldn't take the paparazzi anymore and that she'd be back someday. And he believed that for a long time. And that is like a normal thing that our brains do to help us cope with grief. But he believed it for a long, long time.
until his 20s, I believe.
Yeah.
And I I think it's very easy because even though I was with my mom on her deathbed, for some reason to me it didn't look like her. It didn't look like the person I remembered. And so even though I didn't believe it, there was a thought like, oh, maybe she just ran away from her shitty life.
Yeah.
And it's grief does crazy things, especially when your mind can disassociate it kind of in a different way that, oh, well, that didn't look like her, so it must have not been her. And
Mm-hmm.
he never really got that. I mean, it was a closed cast. He never saw her body. And especially for
Yes.
a child, and how his mother's siblings, especially his uncle, was outraged that they made them walk behind the casket, and that
Yes.
it's they're basically being paraded around, that they wanted a show basically to put on for the public, when really the public should have been thinking about those boys that just lost their mother.
Yeah, I agree because he was what, 12 or 13 when his mom died?
12, he
And
said, I think.
it is tradition in their family to have like the rest of the family make a procession and walk behind the carriage carrying the casket. But there were people who even said, don't make Harry do it. He's too young. And he joked. They were saying, spare the spare. But they were told, nope, he needs to walk with Charles and William. Like it would look bad if they didn't. And I can't imagine having to walk past thousands of people when you just lost one of the most important people in your life and you're walking behind their dead body.
And shake, you know, people's hands and tell them thank you for coming, basically.
Yes. Yeah, like a puppet, like a toy. Like he
And
wasn't a real person allowed to feel what he felt, and he said he couldn't cry. He didn't know why, he didn't know what was wrong with him, but he could not cry about his mom.
it's just so. And he even talks about how even if they didn't make him walk, he wouldn't have wanted his brother to do it without him. He
Mm-hmm.
wanted to be there for his brother. And that just makes me so sad because of the things that happen later. And just, I know that not everybody is close to their siblings throughout their whole life, but I feel like he always tried a little bit harder than his brother. Like his brother never tried to be there for him as much as he tried to be there for William or Willie. He calls him Willie.
Yeah, it's so cute how he calls him Willie. I did feel really torn reading the parts about William. One, because I loved Prince William when I was a teenager. I thought I was gonna grow up and marry him, and I felt like connected to him. What is that called? Parasocial.
Yeah.
But then the way Harry describes him, it he was a dick. But then other parts, I felt like I could understand how William felt, even as Harry described him, because I am the older sibling. And I know what it's like to have so much pressure on you and feel like your younger sibling gets to do things you would never be allowed to do or get away with things you would never get away with. And it is unfair and it can make you resentful.
I do think the one part of me that understands that is about Prince William threw a fit that Harry got to keep his beard for his wedding because William did not. The Queen had him shave it because in almost all militaries around the world in uniform, you're not supposed to have facial hair.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that. He did not get a choice on, even he wanted to wear his army uniform, his army dress
Mm-hmm.
uniform, and he was told, no, you have to wear you, the British monarchy uniform or whatever that was. I can't remember exactly what they
Yeah, the
called it.
fancy red one.
Yes, and Harry got to wear his British uniform and not the other one. And so I do understand. But then there was that part where they both, when they had like a charity project, and if they wanted the money for it, they had to go through their father. But there was this part where they both wanted to do Africa, like, and Prince William was like, Africa's mine, the elephants are mine, I gave you the veterans. And I was just like, Africa's a very big place and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And he just wanted it because I'm sure he wanted it for good reasons, but also I do think that it was shitty that he didn't want to share the
Yeah, so
publicity,
petty
kind
and
of.
immature.
Yes. And I just
And
think it boiled down to the publicity of it all, that maybe if he thought that Harry was doing more or doing better work, then his work would be overshadowed.
mm-hmm. And Harry talks about in the first section the first time he went to Africa. His dad was going on like a public tour there, and invited Harry to go along because this was when Harry was a teenager and was on holiday from boarding school, and he didn't want Harry just sitting around getting into trouble. So he invited Harry to go with him, and Harry describes it as life-changing for him being out in and the Spice Girls were there. So I'm sure that made it better, but they went to South Africa to be with the Spice Girls and Nelson Mandela, and just how it changed his life, like connecting with the animals and nature and seeing impoverished people and how he could help them. And after that, he continued to go to Africa, and it was like his happy place. And he did all these wonderful things there. And it was one of the first trips he went with Meghan on, and he talks about that later, how even though it was like their third date, it was super early. But he said he took Meghan there. They went camping, like in a tent under the stars. And it was kind of a test for her to see how she would react to being in the bushlands. And that when she put her suitcase down, she opened it up and he was thinking, okay, here we go. Here comes the makeup and the hair dryers and all that stuff. But he was so impressed because all she had was shoes, shorts, comfortable clothes. She didn't wear any makeup. And they just spent that week seeing animals and boating and just being out in nature and connecting with each other too. So it's a roundabout way to come back to it. But knowing all that, it is so messed up that William was being such a petulant child and saying, no, this is my charity. I wanted Africa.
I
Like
know.
he doesn't know his brother at all.
I don't think he does, or he doesn't care.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so many instances. Like, he told Harry, I let you have the veterans because Harry, he was in the military. He did 2 tours in Afghanistan. And then on one of the flights back, he had met some wounded veterans, and, it really touched him. And so he did a bunch of touring different, military hospitals, and he came up with the Invictus Games, which is for, disabled veteran, or not disabled, but wounded veterans, whether
Mm-hmm.
they're missing limbs or in wheelchairs, to compete Olympic style. And I don't think, I know that William was in the military, but he never was in combat like Harry was. And to say that
Mm-hmm.
he let him have the veterans when Harry is a veteran.
Exactly. Yes, Queen. That was what I was thinking too. And it pissed me off so bad. And this is my ignorance too, because I remember hearing about, oh, Prince Harry's joining the military. And as an American, not knowing what I'm talking about, I just assumed it was in the same way that William served or Prince Charles served, in the fact that it's a royal duty and they had to, right? But it was different. He wanted to go to war. He believed in what they were doing, and he had that brotherhood, and he had PTSD. He was begging them to let him go on another tour because it was the first thing in his life that made him feel like he was doing something important and that gave his life a purpose. And when he was back home, not on tour, he was lost and depressed, and that must have been really hard too, because eventually they kind of forced him to retire. And he talks about how a lot of times his presence in the military did put his troops at danger, because when the Taliban found out that the English prince was flying helicopters or was at a certain location, there were tons of death threats.
And that's another thing that just made me so angry, is that he had been slated to go to Iraq, and
Mm-hmm.
it got out in the press, and then they were making all these, the enemy was making all these plans to kidnap him for ransom and torture him and blah blah blah. So they scrapped that, and he begged for another way to go and to serve, and so they sent him to Afghanistan, and he wasn't there a full deployment or tour for, his company. It was leaked in the press again. And how do they think that it's okay? Not only is it putting Prince Harry's life in danger, it's putting everyone he's with in danger. That everyone on that
Exactly.
base is in danger if the enemy knows that, an English prince is on there. And it's just, I have been very close to people in the military, and just knowing that, I'm sure there were, people like me and whose loved ones were just there, not having anything to do with it, and that upsets me. It
It
makes me
is it's
so
very
angry.
upsetting. It's very upsetting. And the only way he could get the press to agree not to leak where he was if he agreed to have an interview with the media after his tour was over, which is just so sick because they were using him as leverage. They were
But
using him to make money. After, and then he said one interview after one of his tours, like they were asking him asinine questions, like, did you kill people? And when he said yes, they were shocked and they were like appalled that, oh my gosh, Prince Harry's killed people. And he's like, what do you think I was doing? This is the military. We're at war. Do you think I was baking cookies?
yeah,
Like
and
that dissonance, that how, and me too, right? Like as an average person, it is hard for an average person who's never been in those situations to truly understand what these soldiers go through and the terrible choices they've had to make and the horrors they've seen.
and he even says every every kill he had to make, it was videotaped and scrutinized by anyone and everyone with the
Mm,
right security clearance at that time. So it wasn't, and plus, when you have to be pre-authorized, it's not like
mm-hmm.
most people, or we've talked about it, but most people are not just willy-nilly shooting people.
No.
And so he even said, like, every single one of his confirmed kills, it was done in the proper order of things and how
Mm-hmm.
war is supposed to go.
Yes, he did it by the book as much as it can be done. And he said his number was 25. He
Yes,
was
and
responsible for 25 deaths. And he tells this story about how, because eventually he worked his way up and trained to fly helicopters, which is freaking badass. Like, this book just made me love Prince Harry.
I
um,
know.
but these really fast, really important helicopters that could, shoot at targets, including Taliban people. And there was this one instance where there was 8 Taliban people on mopeds and they were splitting up and he knew that he could get them then. He knew he was in the perfect spot to just shoot them all down, but he couldn't until he got clearance. And so by the time the people making those decisions, because the military doesn't want to hurt civilians, right? They need to make sure that these are actually the enemy. So I don't
Yes.
know exactly how they do that, like with really good cameras or thermal recognition or whatever they do. But he had to wait until it was cleared to shoot. And by the time it was done, he only got one of them. And he knew if he had broken protocol and rules and done it when he had the chance, he would have gotten all 8 of them. But he didn't. He did it the right way.
And it's just so funny how you brought up how they asked him if he had killed people. And when he said yes, they were shocked. And then they tried to vilify him in the
Mm-hmm.
press that he was a killer. And he was doing the same things that people that aren't him were being praised for.
Yeah. But we do have to keep in context that it was England and pretty much most of England hated him. And he says hated Americans and hated that England had been dragged into the Iraqi and
Yes.
Afghanistan wars. So that might have been part of it. But Americans felt that way too. Like you
Yeah.
can support your troops without supporting war. I don't support war, but I
No.
support
I
our
I I
veterans and our
definitely
troops.
understand, but I just think he didn't he didn't do anything wrong by telling the truth, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
And
Nope.
people were basically saying, well, he should go to war because we spent all these tax dollars, like money, on training him. And other people were like, well, it doesn't matter if he's in the military, he's still the queen's grandson, he shouldn't have to go. And that, it just goes back to, you can't make everyone happy.
It's so true. Well, it just makes me think of how brave he really is and was. because he could have just done like his family before him and worn the uniform and taken some cushy little computer job where he was protected the whole time and never in any real danger. But he didn't. I couldn't do it. I am not cut out for the military. The training and stuff he explains. And if anything, I wish he would have said all this sooner because it was so illuminating to me, like the realities of war and the military. Like, what was that training he was talking about where they basically fake kidnapped him?
Oh, yes. I can't remember what he called it, but yeah, they kidnapped him, interrogated him, lightly
Yes.
tortured him. Like,
Yes. I think I saved it because there was one part that made me sick. Let me see if I can find it. So he was doing this exercise where basically they were snatched, had bags put over their heads, taken to locations where they didn't know where they were. And yeah, like you said, they were kind of lightly tortured. Like they played crazy music for a long time and made them stand in certain positions in the cold and not able to move their bodies and choking them and all this crazy stuff because they're training them so that if you actually become a prisoner of war during war, you have that mental strength to resist, right? And he said at one point, people came in and were saying mean things to them, and that he was kind of taking it as a joke, like it wasn't hitting him. Um, so he says, they interrogated us. We gave them nothing. They took us into separate rooms, interrogated us some more. Two men walked in, screamed at me. They left. A tonal music was piped in, a violin being scraped by an angry 2-year-old. What is that? A voice answered, silence. I became convinced that the music wasn't a recording, but an actual child, perhaps also being held prisoner. What in heaven's name was that kid doing on that violin? More, what were they doing to the kid? The men returned. Now they had Phil, who was one of his comrades. They'd gone through his social media, studied him, and they began saying things about his family, his girlfriend, which scared him. It was astonishing how much they knew. How can perfect strangers know so much? I smiled. Welcome to the party, pal. I wasn't taking this seriously enough. One of the men grabbed me, shoved me against the wall. He wore a balaclava. He pressed his forearm into my neck, spitting every word from his mouth. He pressed my shoulders against the concrete. He ordered me to stand 3 feet from the wall, arms above my head, all 10 fingertips against the wall. Stress position. 2 minutes, 10 minutes. My shoulders started to seize. I couldn't breathe. A woman entered. She was wearing a shemagh, sorry, Shemagh. I don't know how to say that, over her
neither.
face. She went on and on about something I didn't understand. I couldn't keep up. Then I realized, Mummy, she was talking about my mother. Your mother was pregnant when she died, eh? With your sibling? A Muslim baby. I fought to turn my head to look at her. I said nothing, but I screamed at her with my eyes. You doing this for my benefit now or yours? Is this the exercise? Or are you getting a cheap thrill? She stormed out. One of the captors spat in my face. We could hear the sound of gunshots, a helicopter. We were dragged into a different room and someone called out, okay, that's it, end exercise. And then he goes on to say that later I learned that 2 other soldiers in the exercise had gone mad. I can't imagine.
Me neither. I don't.
And he's a fucking prince. But they didn't go easy on him.
I know, but some of the things that he talked about doing, I was so amazed because I don't even live anywhere as as crazy as being a prince or royalty, but he did the same type of ruck marches with his platoon, and he had trench foot, which is really gross and hurtful. And he was going to give up, and one of the leaders said, "You'll never forgive yourself if you give up." And so he went on 8 more kilometers. So trench foot is, it happens when your feet are wet for a long period of time, and it breaks down the feet and the skin, and it causes a lot of pain and tingling because of the poor blood flow because of the wetness, and it's very, very painful.
He
They,
said like all the skin on the bottom of his foot came off.
yes, and he did 8 more kilometers on that foot, and he said he did feel so much pride that he finished, and he would have hated himself if he didn't. And that he's been to the North Pole and the South Pole, and those are not, I feel like those are things that might never happen to us. It would take a lot of planning. It's just not as, people are not inviting us to go with them. But he did
Hmm.
it, and he trekked, and he got frostbite on his penis.
Yes, that is a funny part that has been circulating social media since this book came out because he said he went on a trek through the North Pole with some wounded veterans, um, and that they were having fun, but he got so sweaty that he wasn't wearing the proper insulated clothing, and that sweat got really cold. And yes, he got frostbite on his, what did he call it?
Oh.
Not pecker, but some funny British word.
Yes, uh, and some of the stories that he talks about in Africa are so amazing. Like, I want to see elephants in the wild.
Me too. The way he described his connections with the animals in Africa, like there were just a few times like he would meet eyes with them and feel like he was looking into their soul.
And he felt like they were looking into his, and
Hmm.
I just think it's so, or how before he joined the military, he also went to Australia for a couple months, and he worked on a cattle farm. It was owned by somebody that had been his mom's roommate in college or something, and how
Hmm.
hard the work was, but how satisfied he felt at the end of the day. And sometimes I'm like, I wish I could get satisfaction out of the things I'm doing like that. That even though it's
Right?
hard, that it feels good.
Because he did not have to do that. He could have
No.
stayed in England partying with all his other rich friends who, grew up with silver spoons in his mouth, but he wanted more. He wanted something different. And I could not work on a farm. Like, he worked really, really hard in
You know,
Australia.
it's hot in Australia. It's not just like
Hmm.
a cattle. I mean, I'm sure farms in America are tough, but I can't imagine Australia. Like,
Especially for a guy from England where
with
it's
red hair.
gray.
Yeah. And he even talks about how he's like his father, that like the heat really affects them, both of them.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah. So his his military career was really important to him, and it kind of segued into serving veterans being really important to him. And as you said, he did um so he said he came to America and attended, I can't remember what it was called, but it was basically a veteran sporting event for American veterans. And he had such a good time there that he got that idea for what's it called? The Invictus?
yeah, the Invictus Games. I can't
The
remember
Invictus Games.
what it was going to be called, but basically it was going to be called an international version of the event that he went to in America,
Yeah.
so that veterans from all over the world could compete together. And how, watching veterans, compete and regain some of that oomph back, that they
Hmm.
had lost from losing
Yeah.
limbs or breaking their backs. And I think that's so important.
Yeah, he said at the first one, this little girl came up to him, and I don't think I saved that page, so I'm paraphrasing, but she said something like, "Thank you for giving my daddy back."
Yeah, I think it was So yeah, like that, or thank you for making my daddy daddy again. I know
Yes.
exactly what you're talking about, and how her dad had won a gold medal in an event, and
Mm-hmm.
how he was just so happy to be there, and that he hated being in the spotlight because of all the negative press, but he also knew that press could help a lot because of who he was.
Yes, and he was so excited after his first Invictus Games, and he wanted it to become a big thing. And as we mentioned before, he would always have to get permission on funding and stuff like that. I saved another part that really made me mad, um, where he says, "Thrilled, I reached out to Willie, expecting him to be thrilled as well. He was sorely irritated. He wished I'd run all this by him first. My assumption, I said, was that other people had done so. He complained that I'd be using up all the funds in the Royal Foundation. That's absurd, I spluttered. I was told only a £500,000 grant would be needed to get the games going, a fraction of the foundation's money. Besides, it was coming from the Endeavor Fund, an arm of the foundation I'd created specifically for veterans recovery. The rest would come from donors and sponsors. What was going on here, I wondered. Then I realized, my God, sibling rivalry. I put a hand over my eyes. Had we not got past this yet? The whole heir versus the spare thing? Wasn't it a bit late in the day for that tired childhood dynamic? But even if it wasn't, even if Willie insisted on being competitive, on turning our brotherhood into some kind of private Olympiad, hadn't he built up an insurmountable lead? He was married with a baby on the way, while I was eating takeout away alone over the sink. Pausing. I still lived with Pa. Game over, man. You win. And it's so true. Like, there's just many instances where Harry mentions, like, William being upset that he didn't ask him first. Or, like, Harry should have come to him for permission, or he says that the first time Meghan met William, he goes, Meghan went to hug William, and William like recoiled. Looking back, Harry wondered, did William want her to curtsy to him? Because that's what you do the first time you meet a royal. He explains that you're supposed to curtsy the first time and say, Your Royal Highness, and then after that, you call them ma'am or sir.
I feel like he probably did expect that, because it all comes full circle back to Harry not wanting to shave his beard for his wedding, and the Queen said it was okay, and William basically said, I'm the heir to the throne and I'm ordering you to shave it.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, basically, like, piss off. Like, I'm not going to.
Mm-hmm.
And I do, there is part of me that is like, William did not get the same life, but also it's
Yeah,
not like Harry's life was a walk in the park.
right.
Because
It's
the
very
part that
true.
made me so angry is that when there were tabloids running that Harry was on drugs and a drug addict and going to rehab, like many times, the royal family did not make a statement, because Harry alluded to the fact that Charles and Camilla wanted the heat off them because that was around the time they got married, and that was a big upset. So they basically wanted the negative press off them and onto somebody else. And how could you do that to your child?
Right?
Not even issue a statement saying that's not true.
Right. And his dad's excuse was always like, well, there's nothing we can do about it. And Harry's like, you're going to be king. How can you say there's nothing you can do about it? Like, you are letting the media run our lives. And just how it got to Prince Charles so much. Like, Harry describes how growing up, Prince Charles was teased a lot in school and, um, like just felt less than and like he was kind of a loser, which he's not wrong about that. And so when the press would say nice things about him, he was on cloud nine, like he soaked it all up and he lived for that. And they really talk about it in the Meghan Markle section of how eventually he found out that his dad or Camilla, he straight out says Camilla was known to do this, would leak stories. And it wasn't leaking stories about good things that she and Charles were doing. It was negative things about William and Harry and Kate and Meghan. Because, like you said, they were trying to get the spotlight back on them
Yeah,
in a
because
positive way.
if it was something negative about them, they were trying to. I One of the parts said that Camilla's son had been doing something, and so that's when they threw in, oh, the Fab Four or whatever they called them. There's trouble, they're not getting along, and it was to get the pressure off of Camilla's son, who was acting a fool.
I forgot about that.
I just read it like an hour ago. That's why I remember. But I was
Mm-hmm.
just so angry that it's you can make a statement when it benefits you, but you're not going to when people are harassing your child and the person that they love to such an extreme extent.
Right? If you can't stand up for your child, who can you stand up for? So yeah, he talks about how after getting out of the military, he was just lost and he definitely had PTSD symptoms and he eventually just became like a recluse almost. Like he stopped going out with his friends. He was eating takeout every night over the sink by himself and how he only lived like a football field distance away from Kate and William and how he thought he was going to be really close to them and get to be Uncle Harry and come over for dinner with a bottle of wine and presents for the kiddos and how it just didn't happen. Like they didn't invite him, they didn't have time for him, and that made him more depressed. But one thing I thought was really sweet was he became obsessed with Friends. And he said that year he probably watched every episode and he convinced himself that he was the Chandler of his group, which is cute because Chandler's like the jokester, but also has a sensitive side. And how eventually one of his friends said, "Let's go to America." I think he had a girlfriend there or something, not Harry, but his friend, and they ended up staying at Courtney Cox's house.
Yes, it's so cute.
No complaints for me. As a Friends fanatic, the idea of crashing at Monica's was highly appealing and amusing. But then Courtney showed up. I was very confused. Was her job canceled? I didn't think it was my place to ask. More, does this mean we have to leave? She smiled. Of course not, Harry. Plenty of room. Great. But I was still confused because she was Monica and I was Chandler. I wonder if I'd ever work up the courage to tell her. Was there enough tequila in California to get me that brave? Soon after arriving home, Courtney invited more people over. Another party began. Among the newcomers was a bloke who looked familiar. Actor, my mate said. Yes, I know he's an actor. What's his name? He was a friendly sort, and I liked him straight away. I still couldn't place his face or call up his name, but his voice was even more vexingly familiar. And so eventually he says, "Fuck yes, Batman Lego movie." I turned back to the actor and said, "Is it true?" "Is what true? Are you him?" "Am I Batman?" He smiled. Yes. What a thing to be able to say. I begged, "Do it." "Do what?" "The voice." He shut his eyes. He wanted to say no, but he didn't want to be impolite, or else he recognized that I wouldn't stop. He fixed me with his ice blue eyes and cleared his throat, and in perfect gravelly Batmanese said, "Hello, Harry." Oh, I loved it. Again! He did it again. I loved it even more. We shared a big laugh. So this is Will Arnett, who voiced Lego Batman, and he says that eventually he was getting on Will's nerves so much that Will escorted them to the fridge, and inside was a bunch of psychedelic mushrooms. And he said, "Help yourselves, boys," trying to get them onto something else. So he said him and his mate took all these shrooms and he was tripping so hard that he went to the bathroom and he thought that the sink and toilet were turning into faces. And he was just having this amazing experience. So when he left the bathroom, he told his friend, "You gotta go in there. It's incredible." And so his friend went in and came back out and like looked like he was gonna cry. And he said his friend said that when he went in there, the coat with a fur lining that he was wearing turned into a dragon and was trying to eat him.
That's hilarious and so funny because I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that would happen to me. That someone would be like, it's
Yeah,
so
you never
great, and then
know.
I'd be like, I'm not having a good time.
Yep. He said, "My delightful trip had been his hell. How unfortunate. How interesting." I liked
But
how he admitted, like, he smoked weed and he did shrooms. And he even said, because I guess in England they give you laughing gas when you're having a baby, which they don't do here in America. But he said he was hitting Megan so much that when it was time for her to push and the nurse tried to give her some, it was empty. But I appreciated his candidness about that because he's not a drug addict. He's just someone who, dabbled, and I think he still does smoke weed now that they live in California.
yeah, and I think when people try to lie about things or not be forthcoming with the truth, that's when there is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And especially since he had been labeled a drug addict by the press when he
Yeah.
was still in school,
Mm-hmm.
that it was just very open and candid about it. And I think that's important to be genuine because I mean, some people could go back to that story that was in the press and be like, see, he does have a problem. And
Mm-hmm.
he even admitted to there being times in his life where he probably drank too much. But I think we've all had those times in our lives,
Yeah.
especially in our 20s.
Mm-hmm. Where we just need to cut back. And yeah, it's so true because I'm sure William partook in a lot of that stuff. It seemed like it was just the culture of the people they hung out with and their lifestyles, but I bet you he wouldn't admit it.
Guess I had been pretty indifferent towards William and Kate until I read this, and now it makes me angry that they both kind of act naughty and spoiled, even to, I mean, yeah, if I walked up to them on the street, I would expect that, but not to their own family. And that's what's heartbreaking. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what
It
makes me
is.
go, ugh,
It
is
is
that
very sad.
Harry loved William and Kate so much. And then when he was finally, falling in love and being happy for the first time since I wouldn't say that he was happy going to war, but he felt like himself and that he
Mm-hmm.
was finally finding that in, his real everyday life that, they basically were like an American actress divorcee. Like it was basically saying she was a convicted felon, he said, like the way that they
Right?
said American actress or divorcee, even though their father was a divorcee who married a divorcee, and they had, other aunts and uncles who had married divorcees, and
Yep.
because it was him, they just like turned up their noses instead of with everyone else, they turned a blind eye.
It's so true. I guess that might as well segue into the Captain of My Soul section, which was all about how he met Meghan and their life thereafter. And it was so sweet. The way he wrote about her and described her had me tearing up in several points. And I did want to read when he first saw her was he was scrolling through Instagram, which is really weird to think of royalty having private Instagrams. They're definitely not using their names on it. So I wish I could see his feed. But he was scrolling through and he had a friend named Violet, and a video popped up with her and a friend. And it said they were playing with a new app that put silly filters on your photos, which was probably Snapchat. And it said they had dog ears and dog noses and long red tongues. And Despite the canine cartoon overlay, I sat up straighter. This woman with Violet. My God. I watched the video several times, then forced myself to put down the phone. Then picked it up again, watched the video again. I'd traveled the world from top to bottom, literally. I'd hopscotched the continents. I'd met hundreds of thousands of people. I'd crossed paths with a ludicrously large cross section of the planet's 7 billion residents. For 32 years, I'd watched a conveyor belt of faces pass by, and only a handful had ever made me look twice. This woman stopped the conveyor belt. This woman smashed the conveyor belt to bits. I'd never seen anyone so beautiful. And he says it wasn't just the way she looked, and that how beauty, they say, is scientifically based on symmetry and it makes our brains feel better and stuff like that. But he goes on to say, but this woman's beauty and my response to it wasn't based merely on symmetry. There was an energy about her, a wild joy and playfulness. There was something in the way she smiled, the way she interacted with Violet, the way she gazed into the camera, confident, free. She believed life was one grand adventure. I could see that. What a privilege it would be, I thought, to join her on that journey. Oh, getting teary. I got all that from her face, her luminous, angelic face. I'd never had a firm opinion on that burning question. Is there just one person on this earth for each of us? But in that moment, I felt there might be only one face for me. It's so sweet because it sounds cheesy and cliche, but that's honestly how I felt the first time I saw my husband. Like, our eyes just locked, and he seemed like he was glowing. Like, love at first sight, as stupid as it sounds, but it wasn't like lust or love. It was like your soulmate. Like, you just know. And even it's not always romantic. I really felt that way the first time you and I hung out in elementary school. Like, it was just meant to be. And so the way he talks about her is so sweet.
It is. And especially when he talked in other places in his book about previous relationships and how he was looking for that and it just didn't happen, or they weren't the right person because he knows that there's this baggage that comes with being with him, and he was so heartbroken when people were so cruel about her.
Yes.
And he was looking for help from his family, from their contacts, because there's everyone. They have public relations people, and nobody would help him. And he just felt so helpless because he thought he was going to lose the one person that he knew he wanted to be with. And she was stronger than that because, leading up to all the everything, their wedding, and just how much she was harassed, and it was just really heartbreaking because I don't know if I could have handled that. Being stalked and every person you've ever associated with being hounded for, a piece of gossip.
Right. He does, he explains how at the beginning of their relationship, they were able to keep it a secret for, a good amount of time. And that what he loved about her was that she seemed to know nothing about him, which, dating British women, of course they knew who he was. Like, that was just something that he was used to. But on their first few dates, the questions she asked, he could just tell that she hadn't done a bunch of research, and that it was so refreshing to be with someone and feel like they were actually getting to know you, not feeling like they already knew a bunch of stuff about you and you knew nothing about them. And one funny story is the first time she ended up meeting his granny. I think it's so cute that he called the Queen of England his granny. But it was actually an accident. They were supposed to go to dinner at his Aunt Fergie's house where his cousins were going to be. And as they were on their way there, they got a word that Granny was there. She'd popped in on her way from church back to the castle. Meg said, "Fun, I love grandmas." I asked if she knew how to curtsy. She said she thought so, but she also couldn't tell if I was serious. I know, but it's your grandma. But she's the queen. We pulled into the driveway, drove across the gravel, parked next to the big green box hedge. Fergie came outside, somewhat aflutter, and said, "Do you know how to curtsy?" Meg shook her head. Fergie demonstrated once. Meg imitated her. There wasn't time for a more advanced tutorial. We couldn't keep Granny waiting. As we walked towards the door, Fergie and I both leaned into Meg, whispering quick reminders. When you first meet the Queen, it's Your Majesty. Thereafter, it's just ma'am. Rhymes with ham. Just whatever you do, don't talk over her, we both said, talking over each other. Um, and so he goes on to say how it went really well. Meghan dropped into a deep, flawless curtsy and said, "Your Majesty, pleasure to meet you." And it all seemed to go really well. And that as Granny was leaving, Prince Andrew was there too. And after a moment, Meg asked me something about the Queen's assistant. I asked who she was talking about. That man holding the purse. That man who walked her to the door. That wasn't her assistant. Who was it? That was her second son, Andrew. She definitely hadn't Googled us. I love that. She didn't even know who Prince Andrew was.
To be honest, I probably wouldn't be able to pick him out of a lineup.
I would, just because I've gotten so deep into Jeffrey Epstein, but that could be a whole other episode.
True.
And I've watched the Prince Andrew. I don't know why the Queen let him do this, but he did an interview with a British, she kind of seemed like the British Barbara Walters to me, about Epstein. And I watched it several times. It's very entertaining and shocking, and you can totally tell he's lying. I can't believe he did that interview. He was basically trying to make himself look better, but you could tell he was lying, because he was accused of sleeping with this girl when she was underage at Epstein's private islands, and she has like sued him for it, and he was trying to deny it. And one of the things she said was how they were at this club in England, and just how bad Prince Andrew sweat when they were dancing together. And he was trying to say, "I haven't sweated at all since I was in the military because of the PTSD. The doctor said that's a side effect." And it was just such bullshit. Ugh.
Oh, he
And
is
I
so
hope that
gross
now that
looking. I just looked him up.
oh, right, he's so fugly. And that's Fergie's husband. So that's Eugenie, and what's her sister's name? So that's their dad. I think, is he, I can't remember. Oh, the Queen's second son. So I guess he was the Harry of that generation.
Third
But
child and second son.
oh, second son.
Yeah.
Yeah, not half the man Harry is though. And I hope that now Queen is dead, that Andrew will face the music, because I think she protected him a lot. But
I think so
anyway,
too. And
it was just so cute how, I don't know, how normal Meghan made his life feel.
and I remember reading, quite a long time ago that Meghan didn't that she was disrespectful because she didn't adhere to royal protocols. I don't know royal protocols, and I probably wouldn't remember them the way that they're supposed to be done. And how can they think that somebody that wasn't not born in England would understand, you know, everything that has to be done?
Right. He said there was no like Princess Diaries moment where someone took her aside and said, "This is how you dress, this is how you curtsy, this is how you hold a teacup." She was never taught any of that, and then tried to do her best, and she did follow everything that the palace told her to do at first, and she was still criticized for it.
And they didn't say that, like, she basically, the press ripped her a new one for not wearing a hat when she was doing a tour with the Queen, and they told her not to wear a hat. Like, but
Mm-hmm.
they didn't admit that. They just let people think that she was being lower class or not knowing how to do things. And there were many instances that Harry brought up where the palace had told her, or they had signed off on something, and they never issued a statement saying that yes, the palace agreed to this, like she didn't do anything wrong.
Right. And that's all it would have taken. But he says how he thinks his family kind of liked seeing Meghan dragged through the coals because they had gone through it. Because it had happened to Kate a little bit and it had definitely happened to Camilla. And they were happy to not have it be happening to them for a little bit. And he talks about how even growing up with the paparazzi treating him as they did, he was still shocked by how the media treated Meghan when they first found out about her. And I saved one part. He says, I was shocked and I scolded myself for being shocked and for being unprepared. I'd been braced for the usual madness, the standard libels, but I hadn't anticipated this level of unrestrained lying. Above all, I hadn't been ready for the racism, both the dog whistle racism and the glaring, vulgar, in your face racism. The Daily Mail took the lead. Its headline, Harry's girl is almost straight out of Compton. Subhead, gang scarred home of her mother revealed. So will he be dropping in for tea? Harry to marry into gangster royalty? And there were just many instances like that where they were so racist against her. And one thing that really made me mad was he said after they had Archie, they left the hospital really quickly. Like they basically had Archie, was there at the hospital for a couple hours, and then were escorted home. And normally what royalty was expected to do was as soon as they had the baby or the next day, they would stand outside the hospital and pose for pictures. That was just tradition. When they got back home and Harry announced that they had a boy, and the media found out that they had been cheated in their eyes out of that picture taking, they posted a picture of Meghan and Harry holding hands with a chimpanzee.
That is so disgusting. And
Right?
I'm sorry, but yes, Camilla got it in the media. Kate did not hardly get any negative media. Maybe one or two headlines that were
Mm-hmm.
not memorable. That it's not even just about adults. Now they're mocking a newborn child.
Right? And so disgusting.
And there's even, I just Googled it to see if I could find anything. Nothing popped up really, but it says Middleton faced far worse media attention than Meghan Markle.
And it's not the same. Like race, you can make fun of someone's clothes. You can make fun of like what they do for a living, which is just touching on that. It's super hypocritical because like you said, his family kind of judged her for being American and an actress, but William and Kate were huge Suits fans. They freaking loved that show that Meghan was on. And they wouldn't admit it to her, but they admitted it to Harry.
And the
Um,
fact that Kate called Meghan 4 days before her wedding and demanded that Princess Charlotte's dress be remade because it didn't fit when Harry
and that
told her to
Charlotte was
take it.
crying.
Yeah. And Harry told her, like, take it to. They had somebody on staff at the palace to do the alterations. Like, take it. Like, that's all I can tell you. But she demanded it be remade 4 days before the wedding.
Mm-hmm. It's terrible and would make Kate would make Meghan cry. And there was an instance he said where they were at an event and Meghan asked to borrow Kate's lip gloss and Kate gave it to her but was pissed off about it, like just so petty. And how there was this tension building and Harry and Meghan didn't understand where it was coming from. And William and Kate finally came over for dinner one night to hash it out. And Kate was mad at Meghan because Kate had forgotten something,
Oh,
like a detail of the wedding or something like that. And Meghan was like, it's okay, like you have baby brain. And Kate was like, you were talking about my hormones. We're not close enough for you to talk about my hormones. And Meghan was just like, what the fuck? Where did this come from? And some of that might just be cultural, like Britain is known for just being more private and more, I don't know how to describe it. To me, it seems fake, but
yeah,
whereas
but
Americans
also
are very direct.
it wasn't it wasn't like she was asking about her hormones. It was probably like an offhanded comment, like, "Oh, that's okay. You know, you just had a baby. There's hormones." And
Mm-hmm.
that is so true. And Harry even talks about how he likes that about Americans. Like
Yes.
they're straight to the point, where as other, you know, English people think that they're loud and obnoxious and they're
And
not,
that might be something he picked up from the military because you don't have time to mince words.
yeah.
People are just direct, and it does make life easier.
And Harry has talked about it in his book, and also people that I know. When you're in country in war, you're with everyone. Like
Mm-hmm.
you work with Americans and the English, and he even talked about a Fijian,
Indian.
yeah, soldier
Mm-hmm.
and or the Gurkhas.
Mm-hmm.
um, and you're just around everyone, so maybe he came to appreciate that more than people that aren't in that situation.
And at first, it seemed like they really liked Megan. Like, he talks about how Charles and her really bonded, like, over music, and how Charles was just awed by her intelligence and the life she had lived up into that point. And he said, like, when Megan was around him, he saw a part of his dad he had never seen before, almost like his dad became a boy again. But it's like it seemed to change once Meghan and Harry were getting all this good press and his dad's freaking ego. And there's this one part where he says, he was talking with his dad driving around and he asked about Meg, not with great interest, just casually. Still, he didn't always ask, so I was pleased. She's good, thanks. Does she want to carry on working? Say again? Does she want to keep on acting? Oh, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't think so. I expect she'll want to be with me doing the job, which would rule out Suits since they film in Toronto. I see. Well, darling boy, there's not enough money. What was he banging on about? He explained, or tried to. I can't pay for anyone else. I'm already having to pay for your brother and Catherine. I flinched. Something about his use of the name Catherine. I remembered the first time he and Camilla wanted Kate to change the spelling of her name because they were already two royal ciphers with C and a crown above, Charles and Camilla. It would be too confusing to have another. Make it Catherine with a K, they suggested. I wondered now what came of that suggestion. The frickin' audacity to tell Kate, to change her name to spell it with a K so that there weren't too many C's. Are you kidding me?
Oh my god. And he actually, like, he's penniless. And how can you tell one child, like, yes, I'll pay for your brother's wife, but if you want to get married, no.
Right? Yeah, it just all these things that just made Harry feel like he was less than. And he was. He was in their eyes.
And going back to the Kate thing, if she was not comfortable giving the lip gloss, she just had to say, that's not something I'm comfortable with, not do it, and then get angry.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she made the choice to do it. If I feel like Meghan had this idea that they were closer than they were, because I do think that Kate and William they have walls up, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
They probably have to do that, but I feel like I would be similar and just be like, "Oh yeah, like you can borrow this, have this," or just talk openly with somebody that I was, thought maybe I was going to be in their family. And
Mm-hmm.
she just could have said, you know, like, that's not something I'm comfortable with. Like, you can't do something and then get mad at the person for asking and you did it.
Yes, and it's so sad because he talks about how, Megan's mom and dad were being stalked by paparazzi and offered insane amounts of money to give pictures or interviews, and how most of the people in her life resisted, but her dad eventually gave in. They found out that her dad did take money to pose for fake paparazzi photos. Like he was reading a book about England, like he was brushing up on things before the wedding, and how eventually the stress of it, her dad had a heart attack and couldn't even come to her wedding.
Which I did want to touch on that because, you know, talking about how bad, how bad of choices I thought King Charles has made as a parent. It also goes both ways that it is very difficult when you're being harassed, but also that's your child, like that he did
Right.
that to. He gave a letter that she wrote him to the Daily Mail to publish, and
Yes.
I do believe that he said that that was illegal, that you can't just post somebody's correspondence without their permission, whether they're giving it to somebody or not.
Yes. She was really upset and she missed her father, and she asked, what do I do about this? And the queen actually gave her that advice. Um, like go see him and talk to him. And Megan explained how her dad lived on this Mexican border country, which because her dad was worked in Hollywood as like a lighting tech. And so I think he made pretty good money when Megan was growing up and they were very close. But when Californians, I've seen this happen several times, move to Mexico, it's because they can't afford California anymore. So I'm sure he wasn't well off financially anymore. But Meghan and Harry offered to move him to England, get him away from all the people who were harassing him. They would put him up in a nice apartment, and he didn't take that. Instead, he just did what served him best, and that was throwing his daughter under the bus. Since she couldn't go see him, the queen was like, "Oh, well, write him a letter instead." And so Meghan said she wrote this 5-page letter that was coming from a place of love, of just wanting to reconnect with her dad again. And he fucking gave it to the press.
I do think it's very heartbreaking to realize that your parent would do that to you. I know that
Yes.
she still has a good relationship with her mom, but to just feel like you don't have that safe space anymore that you
Mm-hmm.
grew up with, and even as an adult, she had a close relationship with her father, that it just wasn't there anymore. And that's heartbreaking.
It is. She describes herself as always being a daddy's girl. And I think it's normal for kids to feel a little closer to one parent than the other for whatever reason those may be. It just does tend to happen. And he's missing out on so much. He missed their wedding. He's missing out on watching his grandchildren grow up. And for what? And I think that was probably harder than anything else she went through. And there's this moment where Harry is talking about how they were trying to um, get this certain estate in England refinished so that they would have a home with their baby, and how Paps, as he calls them, just kept like bringing helicopters and drones and aiming cameras into their windows and stuff, and how one day he came home and found Meg sitting on the stairs. She was sobbing uncontrollably. My love, what's happened? I thought for sure we'd lost the baby because this was when she was pregnant with Archie. I went to her on my knees. She choked out that she didn't want to do this anymore. Do what? Live. I didn't catch her meaning at first. I didn't understand. Maybe didn't want to understand. My mind just didn't want to process the words. It's all so painful, she was saying. What is? To be hated like this. For what? What had she done? She asked. She really wanted to know. What sin had she committed to deserve this kind of treatment? She just wanted to make the pain stop, she said, not only for her, but everyone. For me, her mother, but she couldn't make it stop, so she decided to disappear. Disappear? Without her, she said, all the press would go away, and then I wouldn't have to live like this. Our unborn child would never have to live like this. It's so clear, she kept saying. It's so clear. Just stop breathing. Stop being. This exists because I exist.
Being a newlywed and then being pregnant and having to go through all of it. Because I will admit, I did not have the highest opinion of Meghan Markle before I
Mm-hmm.
read this book, but that's just because I only saw the headlines. I didn't click on,
Right.
I didn't, like he said, we didn't really know the ins and outs of the monarchy and the royal family besides what is big. And when it's big and it's like, oh, the one that I brought up earlier, she wasn't wearing a hat. And I'm like, oh, how could she not? We're not told that she was told she not to. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm glad that I read this so that I was able to, get a better insight of the person that she is. And I feel like, she really cares for her husband and her children. And I don't think anyone live under such scrutiny.
I think people do default to, well, what do they have to be upset about? They're rich, they're famous. She married a prince where she didn't want to live anymore. And I've read before that a huge percentage of adults have had suicidal ideations at some point in their life. I know I have, where it doesn't matter. You can't see the good things in those moments. Like nothing seems worth the pain that you're feeling in that moment, and you just want it to stop. And to know that had she never met Harry, she wouldn't have been experiencing that stuff, but she stuck with him.
Maybe they have everything that they need paid for, but I wouldn't call them rich because they have to ask for the money and they have to
Right.
ask to move. When they were growing out of the house that they had first lived in together, Harry had to ask the Queen for a new place to live. Like it wasn't just
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna move. Like where can we move to? It was we have to ask because they do work for the royal family. It's what's a given to them. And
Mm-hmm.
he even talked about how in a conversation with his grandma, he was like, we were understaffed and we had inexperienced staff, and I asked for better support. And basically, the Queen's right hand woman was like, no, you didn't. We didn't know that because the Queen
Right.
was really distraught over it. Like, why didn't you ask? Or we could have helped you. And he was like, I did ask. And she was like, no, you didn't. Even though they did ask, it was just easier to not tell the Queen that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because as Harry had said, that, William always thought that the Queen had a soft spot for Harry. And maybe that was true because I don't think that the Queen really wanted the worst for him. Like, he wanted it was Remembrance Day. I can't remember what they call it in England, but it's basically like our Memorial Day, and he wanted a wreath laid in his name, and they said no. And so he
Yeah,
called
because
up
he
one
was
of his old,
overseas.
yeah, because he was in America at that time, and they said no, like nobody was going to do it for him. But he called one of his old instructors, and they laid one under his name, and told them that he thought it was, bullshit that they wouldn't, because I think if it would have been anyone else, they would have done it. Like if, Prince Charles or, King Charles or Prince William was on vacation, they would have done it for them. But it was because of, so I guess I was also ignorant about how the monarchy was run. And because I was like, oh, the Queen said no. That's what I thought. I'm like, oh, the Queen told him he couldn't, or they couldn't lay
Right.
a wreath for him. And I don't think that that's true. I think it was the powers that be in their circle, the inner
Circle.
circle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something he touched on too a little bit, and I wish he would have gone more into it, but honestly, he's probably worried about maybe legal repercussions if he talks about people who are still alive. But he mentions how there were these three men usually around his granny, who like kept her schedules and lots of her press and made a lot of decisions and kind of had a lot of power, and how he felt like they were taking advantage of a 90-year-old woman, and how he had an appointment, him and Meghan, to go see his granny. And as they were on their way there, one of these guys said, don't come, you can't come over, she's not available, she's booked all week. And Meghan and Harry wanted to talk to his granny about just separating from their duties a little bit for their mental health. They wanted to spend less time in England because of the press always invading their privacy and stuff, and they were in fear for their child. And to not to even be able to see your grandma, to not be able to just walk up to the door and get to see her. I can't imagine what that's like. It's so formal, and that's not family.
I know, because who did Stephen say that the queen knew that she was supposed to meet with them?
Mm-hmm.
She was in her 90s.
And the more that Harry and Meghan spoke up for themselves, and the more they urged the royal family to just change their ways, break away from the media, stand up for ourselves, like we can sue them. The more they said that, it's like the more his family turned on him, and the angrier William got. Like, there were several instances where I felt like William was gaslighting Harry, because when he first got out of the military, before he met Meghan and was really depressed, William kept saying, you need help. You should go to a therapist. And so eventually, because Harry said he tried a couple therapists and none of them felt like a good fit, which happens. So he stopped going. But then when they were first dating, like the first few months, him and Meghan got into this really big fight where he was like mean to her. And Meghan sat down and said, I will not be in a relationship where I'm talked to that way. I will not have children around people talking to each other that way. She was like, where did you learn this? Did you grow up around people talking to each other like that? Like, this is not normal. And he started going to therapy after that. And he did find a therapist he really liked and was going regularly. And he says how him and Meghan went to this, it was called the Well Child Awards, which was an annual event that honored children suffering from serious illnesses. And that when he was on stage giving his remarks, he teared up a little bit because he was a new dad and he saw all these parents who were, going through this with their sick children, and he just felt choked up. And so after that, I got a text from Willie. He was in Pakistan on tour. He said I was clearly struggling and he was worried about me. I thanked him for his concern, assured him I was fine. I'd become emotional in front of a room full of sick kids and their folks just after becoming a father myself. Nothing abnormal in that. He said I wasn't well. He said again that I needed help. I reminded him that I was doing therapy. In fact, he'd recently told me he wanted to accompany me to a session because he suspected I was being brainwashed. Then come, I said. It will be good for you, good for us. He never came. So it's like you tell him to go to therapy, and then when he does, you tell him the therapist is brainwashing him. I'm like, that's like gaslight 101.
Oh my, it is. And he probably knew that Harry was being honest about his life and his experiences and the things that were bothering him. And William probably knew that he was not being painted in the best light, or
Mm-hmm.
neither was his father, and they're both in line to be king in their lifetime.
Yes.
Ugh,
And, toxic people don't like when you go to therapy and start healing and seeing their narcissism and seeing the way you've been mistreated and setting boundaries.
it's not like Harry is delusional. He knows that he wasn't able to be there for his brother after their mom died, but they were also children. They should have had, adults that were there for them, because he even says like, oh, well, William tried to talk about their their mom and he shut it down. He didn't want to. And I don't think that it should just be on Harry to fill that
Yeah.
for William, because he talks about not being able to cry after his mom died.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so real.
Yes.
My mom has been dead for a year and a half. I haven't cried.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think it will come eventually, but it's just the shock of things. And it's, I think you need people that are not going through the same thing as you, and that as children, they should have been taken to some type of
Mm-hmm.
counseling and or therapy, whatever they needed. But because obviously Charles wasn't able to be there for them, I do believe in some of the stories that Harry told, that his dad was proud of him and cared about him. But I also
Mm-hmm.
feel like he very self-absorbed and
Yes.
self-serving in his quest to become king. Like, it's been inevitable for the past 20 years and it just happened. Like, the queen was 96. I did look it up just so, we
Oh,
can
okay.
put that little footnote on there that it was correct that she was 96. And most people don't live that long.
Yeah. And I think if her husband would have lived longer, she probably would have too.
Yeah, I've worked with the elderly before, and it's very common for people to either die very soon after their spouses or like outlive them by 15, 20 years, depending on the relationship. Some people
Mm-hmm.
thrive after their spouses die,
Very true.
which is sad to laugh at, but it is true.
Yeah, because some people are just miserable in their marriage and just stay together because it's what's easiest.
That's what happened
Um,
with my husband's grandparents. His grandma lived a long time after her husband died, but they got married out of it was a different time when they got married.
yeah.
So I wanted to say out of convenience, but I don't even think that's it. I think it was just a different time.
Mm-hmm. He talks about how eventually he and Megan just made the choice to leave the monarchy. And he said he told his dad, I want to do this. We'll give up our titles if we have to do it. We need to get out of here. And he said his dad was the only person he ever said that to. So shortly after, when the media reported that Harry and Meghan were willing to give up their titles, he knew his dad had leaked it. And it felt like such a betrayal,
Because it
which it
is.
was. Yeah.
It's just disgusting what some
And it took,
people do for themselves
hmm
at the
or for
cost of other
money.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it took them a while to find their place. Like they spent some time in Canada as long as they could before paparazzi ruined that. And then they stayed in California. They even stayed at Tyler Perry's house for a while because he said after Princess Diana visited Harlem in the 90s, Tyler Perry's mom fell in love with her and like Princess Diana could do no wrong in his eyes. And that his mom had died, Tyler Perry's mom had died 10 years earlier. So he was giving them use of his house for as long as they needed it in like honor of Diana, which was so sweet. And there's this scene where I think this might have been in their Canadian house, but they were spending Christmas there, and that they were decorating the tree with Archie, and Megan had found this hilarious ornament of the queen that looked just like her. So they put it on the front of the tree, and unfortunately, I can't remember if it was Archie or one of their dogs, but it fell and broke. And, they just laughed about it, cleaned it up, and threw it away. But he says later there was this psychic who was really recommended to them. And, he wasn't sure about it at first, and didn't even know exactly what she did, but that she claimed to have powers. And he thought it was just going to be silly and a funny story to tell, and nothing would come of it. So he asked himself, what's the harm? And he says, then, the minute we sat down together, I felt an energy around her. Oh, I thought, wow, there's something here. She felt an energy around me too. She said, your mother is with you. I know, I've felt that of late. She said, no, she's with you right now. I felt my neck grow warm. My eyes watered. Your mother knows you're looking for clarity. Your mother feels your confusion. She knows that you have so many questions. I do. The answers will come in time, one day in the future. Have patience. Patience? In the meantime, the woman said, my mother was very proud of me and fully supportive. She knew it wasn't easy. What wasn't? Your mother says you're living the life she couldn't. You're living the life she wanted for you. I swallowed. I wanted to believe. I wanted every word this woman was saying to be true. But I needed proof, a sign, anything. Your mother says, the ornament? Ornament? She was there. Where? Your mother says something about a Christmas ornament of a mother or a grandmother. It fell, broke. Archie tried to fix it. Your mother says she had a bit of a giggle about that. It gives me chills because, some of those things like it'll all make sense in the future. Your mother knows you want clarity. Like that could be so vague, right? I
Yeah.
could sit here and make those things up and say I'm a psychic, but the ornament thing really made him believe. And I thought that was really cool that he shared that story.
That is really cool. I think when I visit you, we should go to a psychic if you're ready. Because I know sometimes you have to be in the right mindset, so we might decide that later.
If there's any around here that are good, I just don't want to
Yeah,
go to a
a
crook.
hokey. That's why I haven't gone to one here.
Yeah,
I've
but we
seen
could do
some
some
signs.
research.
Yeah, see if there's anything. Or when we go to a bigger city to see Ed Sheeran, maybe there's something around there.
True, that's a good idea. Yeah, I mean, the rest of the book is more of the same, just talking about all the struggles him and Megan went through. But I love how it just ended with them escaping, kind of, and deciding to make their own trail and finally feeling free, like Harry always wanted and Megan had when she met him. And I was looking it up for this book. It says that he signed a 4-book contract. So there must be more coming. I read that one,
Interesting.
yeah. Um, so I read that one's going to be about his military service, and I don't know about the others, but for that 4-book deal, he got $20 million. And I don't think that includes money he'll make from many books being sold. And then they signed a deal with Netflix where they would not only make their documentary, but they plan on making like children's shows and other projects. And that deal with Netflix was for $100 million. So they have more money than King Charles now, which I just freaking laugh about. Good for them.
I know that they were able to, they're like, I know people were like, oh, how could they leave the monarchy and the royal family and give up their titles and what are they gonna do? It shows you that they're competent people and they don't need somebody telling them what they can and can't do, or they're gonna have X,
Hmm.
Y, and Z taken away.
And they're not going to sell their souls because I kind of feel like that's what William and Kate have done. They are freaking dolls. They're puppets for the monarchy. Like
Good
they
for
are
them.
still trapped in doing what daddy wants.
Because I have heard allegedly that Prince William is not faithful to her and she's staying.
Really?
I have heard that, yeah.
Like
I'll see
father,
if I
like
can.
son.
I know. That's why it stuck out in my head. I'll see if I can find the link and send it to you, but it ruins that image of, they're still
Perfection.
trying to have that image of the perfection and that she's still there and that she doesn't
Mm-hmm.
want to give up the status of, being the princess of Wales because
Right.
it was such a beloved position that technically Camilla could have had that title, but the queen did not give it to her because Diana was so loved, and they probably knew there would be a lot of backlash if Camilla
Yep.
had that title. So now
And
she's the
that
queen consort.
and that's what so much of this book talked about, and how so much of the monarchy is kind of in a tough position because a lot of people do think it's a waste of money and that this family shouldn't be put on a pedestal anymore. So the royal family kind of is at the mercy of always wanting the public to praise them or accept them and to keep winning them over year after year. And like you said, you'll never make anyone happy. So living your life to try sounds miserable.
And I think with the passing of the queen, I just feel like there's going to be a turn in the
Mm-hmm.
monarchy. I don't know if it's going to happen quickly, but I do think that the queen was such a figure because she had been the queen for so long, over 75 years or something,
Yeah, I
since she
think
was
so.
25 until
Mm-hmm.
she was 96, that I don't think people are going to respond the same way to the new king.
No,
King
I don't
Charles.
either.
Especially how I don't know. Maybe when William becomes king it'll be different, but I don't know.
I do think people like him and Kate a lot more, but yeah, we'll see. I'm sure Charles is going to live a long time. Who knows if William and Kate will even still be together by then?
I think they will, just more out of appearances than happiness.
Mm,
I feel like
maybe.
reading about, I mean, I can't say that I know them, but reading about them and just the way they seem to act, it just seems like they would rather have the appearance of a happy family and than actually be one.
Yeah.
Whether that would be apart, you know,
Hmm.
they would rather pretend that they are together than not have those same things.
Hmm. And I would like to think that Harry and William can repair their relationship someday and be the close brothers that Harry always wanted, but I just don't know, especially after this book. I can just imagine Kate in bed scathingly reading it.
Well, he's still getting the money because she bought it.
Oh,
But
but
this was
yeah,
a,
good for them.
I know, I do think, like you said, that, or I hope that they can repair their relationship. I believe anybody, mostly anybody can. I don't think there's many things that you can't come back from in relationships with your family, but also this book is out there and it was a big hit. I mean, I paid $27 for it. So,
Right?
I mean,
It was good. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I was
I def
impressed by how good it was.
it was very good. I didn't really have any expectations going into it. I didn't really know what to expect,
Hmm.
but it was very good.
So yeah, that was The Spare.
By Prince
Next week we'll be
Harry.
talking. Yes, by Prince Harry. I'm glad that he's still Prince.
Yes, me
Um,
too.
Next week we're going to be talking about Jeanette McCurdy's book. I'm glad my mom died.
And boy, do I have a lot to say about that too.
Yeah,
I
get
was,
some rest. That's going to
yes,
be a big one.
Yes, I do recommend that everyone read all of these that we've been talking about. They're all so good and also different. So if
Mm-hmm.
memoirs aren't your thing, pick somebody that you know, whether it's Seth Rogen, Naya Rivera, Tom Felton, Prince Harry. There's something for everyone, and I've really enjoyed this memoir madness, and I'm excited to wrap it up next week.
Good point. Well, thank you for being with us tonight and listening to all the tea we cannot sip.
Bye bye.
Bye.